Being true to yourself is the most important thing in your life. Knowing who you are and being proud of who you are. Knowing that you have certain talents and you want to develop them the best way you can. And not everything you do is going to be as successful as you'd like for it to be. But the thing that I like to emphasize to my son and to anybody who asks me that question, there's no such thing as a failure, because there's always a way around it. There's a wall. You can go up it, or you can go around it, or you can dig under it, or you can get a 1-ton Ford pickup and run into it. There's always a way to get around that barrier.
The Converse Cowboy journey has given me an opportunity to sit down with some amazing performers that are living the Western lifestyle, where it is my job to tease out their habits and routines so that you can apply and test yourself in your own life. I've learned, I've grown personally, I've been enlightened, and I've been humbled. Above all, I realize that there is no destination in this life, no goal achieved or money made that can replace the feeling of flow and the pursuit of doing what you love to do. With a growth mindset, I'm constantly asking questions and pursuing knowledge. The Converse Cowboy is a platform that allows me to do just that. On this tour, we head to Fort Worth, Texas, where most of the Western world gathered for the NFR, the NCHA Futurity, and Cowboy Christmas. We set up at Schaefer Outfitter in the Stockyards to record podcasts with some incredible people. I'm excited and eager to share their stories with you all. I'm Mike Roberts. This is the Converse Cowboy. Brought to you by Kerry Kelly Bits and Spurs and Schaefer Outfitter. So Red, thank you so much for sitting down, man. I'm very grateful for your time. We're down here at the Schaefer store in the Stockyards. It's a cool vibe right now. You know, with the NFR in town, the Cutting Horse Futurity, Cowboy Christmas, there's just this vibe in the air that's really cool and people everywhere. So for you to take time out of your day, I know you've got a lot going on, I really appreciate it. Most everybody in the Western world knows who Red Steagal is, but I'll just list some of the things where they could find you if they didn't. So from radio, TV, Red's a cowboy poet, singer, author, songwriter, and known as the official cowboy poet of Texas, poet laureate, designated by state legislature. And I'm sure I left something out. And so I want to get into mindset on, you know, how you've been able to overcome challenges and adversity throughout your career, which is close to 50 years. So, but before we do that, since we are in Fort Worth and in the Stockyards, how's life treating you, my friend?
It's a cowboy world down here right now.
Yes, sir.
And Fort Worth is, we call it Cow Town because the cow built the town. You know, the livestock industry was the reason it was here after the military post left. And it started out as a 4-block square log buildings up on the bluff of the Trinity River. Mm-hmm. And it's grown into an unbelievable community. And I like to say that Fort Worth is the only town in the world that has a soul and its own character and has a feeling for its community that everybody's pulling on the same chain, looking through the same window.
Yes, sir.
And our life support is wheat, oil, and cattle. And some of the older families that have been here built the town. They built the industry. Of course, Swift and Armour, when they came in here with the killing floors and the packing plants, made a big difference in that part where we're sitting right now. This was the stockyards, the historic stockyards, mm-hmm. And it is a historical district. And there's some changes happening. They look like they're good changes. Proud to be a part of it. Yeah. And it's a great place to live, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I don't live in town. I live out in the country.
I saw a quote. I really liked it. You said, "My place is not big enough to make a living, but too big to keep clean."
That's exactly
That's
right.
the way I feel. I got about 85 acres there in West Monroe. It's the same way.
Yeah, you can't keep it clean, but
Yeah.
and I can't make it on the 6 geldings and 2 mares.
Yeah. So I got into cutting horses earlier this year, and I noted, I saw somewhere that you used to be in the. Did you compete or were you breeding?
Well, I rode in the celebrity events, but I never did go down the road. But at one time,
Were you breeding some horses?
yeah, I had a band of brood mares, and in those early days of my career, I had my band on salary. I didn't know there was any other way to do it. I wanted to hold that group together, and so we became a cohesive unit. So I had them on salary. So I figured I was paying them anyhow, so I could go do whatever I wanted to. So I'd have some friends in the horse business, and they paid me, to come and play dances after their horse sales, but they paid me in breeding fees and to upgrade my mare van.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a win-win.
I did pretty well. Paid for the ranch with them.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, you've done a number of things to, I guess, to complement that growth, with Fort Worth, and we'll get into it here in a little bit, with Red Steagal's Cowboy Gathering that you started back in the early 90s. But mentioning, the NFR, I heard you played last night, right?
Yes, I did.
When Buster Fryston rode the...
Yes. Buster rode the horse around to create some action, and
Yeah.
we had for those who didn't watch it, we had a big lighted cross come down out of the ceiling of that Coliseum. And then the boys and I were on a stage, and we did Amazing Grace.
Oh, awesome.
And then all of the people who have died this year, their name and their image came up on the screen, and then somebody in their family then brought their hat and laid it in front of the cross.
Man, how many people was it?
15.
That's special.
It was.
Special.
It was very special. I was proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, I'm sure you were. I haven't made it over there yet. At some point this week, we're going to be here all week, so at some point I'll try to get by there. But so, you've been in Fort Worth a long time, but you haven't always been around here. And I want to kind of go back to some of the early days, specifically when you were in Hollywood for 8 years as a music executive.
Well, I grew up in the Panhandle because my family is from Montague County, which is about 45 minutes from where we're sitting.
Okay.
For 4 generations on both sides. They came across the Red River in 1870 from Tennessee, both sides, mother's and daddy's families. And then when I was 3, I was born in Gainesville, and when I was 3, there weren't any jobs left in Montague County, and Daddy moved to the oil fields up in the Panhandle. So that's where I grew up. I went to high school at Phillips High School, went to college at what is now West Texas A&M University.
Right.
And I had 5 years in agricultural chemistry. And I was in the field selling ag chemicals and fumigating stored grain masses. And I got a real good education in agriculture, and it's held me in good stead because as I go through the years now, I look back on my life, and the people I still appeal to and still talk to are the people in agriculture. So my knowledge of agriculture, when I'm doing a radio show or a TV show, I know what kind of questions to ask.
Right.
Because I understand their industry. I don't understand necessarily all of their problems today, but I understand their industry.
Right.
And then in 55, I had some friends, 65, had some friends who were doing pretty good in Hollywood, and they said they needed some help. And that's what I'd always wanted to do. I wanted to be in show business. So,
Yeah, I read that from when you were a kid, right? That you
Yeah.
always knew you were going to be in show business. What influenced
well, that was
that?
my dream.
Okay.
I love to sing. And I just...
From an early age then?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just love show business. So I went out to California in 65, stayed there 8 years, wound up in the publishing business, music publishing. Because I didn't know anything about the business. I couldn't.
Yeah, did you
jump
know anybody
right
when
in
you
there.
moved? That's a pretty bold
Oh,
move.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I had 2 really close friends out there, and one of them became the greatest record producer of his time. His name is Jimmy Bowen.
okay.
I talked to him day before yesterday.
Okay.
And the other one was a guy named Don Lanier, that I had grown up with in the little town of Sanford, Texas. When we started to high school, his daddy got transferred to a plant on the other side of the river, and so he went to high school at Dumas.
Okay.
That's where he and Jimmy became good friends. And then they went to West Texas, and they met a guy named Buddy Knox in 1957. And they formed a group called Buddy Knox and the Rhythm Orchids. And they were the forerunners of rockabilly music. They had 7 #1 records in a row. And Jimmy went to Hollywood when Buddy got drafted. He went to Korea, and then Donnie came back to Amarillo, and we fooled around in the music business, and I had a little band, played rodeo dances and things like that
Yeah.
when I was home.
Yeah.
And so they went to Hollywood together. Or, I mean, Donnie came out there later on when Jimmy started having some success.
I see.
And he was working for Frank Sinatra at Reprise Records and recording Frank and Dean and Buddy Greco and a whole bunch of them.
So was it in that time that you found that little girl at the NFR and playing the National Anthem in Oklahoma City?
No, this was after I had moved to Nashville. I moved to Nashville in '73.
Okay.
And it was in the winter of '74. I had already had a couple of records on the charts. And I wanted to get back into rodeo because rodeo had been a big part of my life before I lost my arm. And so I wanted to be a part of it. So I went to the national finals with another good friend, Ernie Taylor. And I heard this girl sing the national anthem. And she doesn't remember it exactly the same way I do, but I remember walking down the hallway of the hotel, and this lady grabbed me by the arm and said, "Are you going up to the Justin Suite and sing?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Can I bring my little girl up there?" And I said, "Sure. I mean, I'm a visitor. I'm not going to say no to anybody for any reason." So then she walked in the door with this little red-headed, freckle-faced girl and sat her down beside me, and she started harmonizing with me. And then played a couple of songs, and she sang and just blew me away. And I remembered then it was that girl that was singing the national anthem. That was so inspiring to me.
And that person being?
And that was Reba McEntire. And I had her and her mother come to Nashville then in January. And we cut a demo record with her. And I finally got her a record deal in October of '75.
That's awesome.
And it's been a great, great life for her, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
She's made a big difference.
Oh, yeah. A big difference, yeah, on that industry and in a number of people's lives just by the music she puts out. So I read a quote, or maybe I heard a quote that you said in another interview, and man, it really resonated. It says, "You have to have tough skin doing this business because you're selling the most precious commodity that you own, and that's yourself." So can you tell me, like, as a musician, as an artist, how do you separate the business side from the art and doing what's true to you? You know what I mean? Like the business side being following trends and doing what may make you more money versus doing what's true to you.
I know exactly what you're talking about. And being true to yourself is the most important thing in your life. Knowing who you are and being proud of who you are. Knowing that you have certain talents and you want to develop them the best way you can. And not everything you do is going to be as successful as you'd like for it to be. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I like to emphasize to my son and to anybody who asks me that question, there's no such thing as a failure. Because there's always a way around it. There's a wall. You can go up it, or you can go around it, or you can dig under it, or you can get a 1-ton Ford pickup and run into it. There's always a way to get around that barrier. The next thing you have to remember that you don't make mistakes. Mistakes are opportunities to learn. And so what we call failures give us an opportunity to experience those opportunities to learn.
Right.
So you take all those things and take the positive things away from it. And if you can do that, and if you can stand on your own 2 feet and say, "I'm responsible for this. My destiny depends on me. It's not all those other people out there that are maybe making remarks about me or turning me down." Because the most important thing you own is yourself and your self-worth. And so you have to be a stable enough person to say, they may hit me again, but they're not going to jam at me from that side.
Yeah.
You got to be able to stand there and say, "Hey." So that wasn't the best I can do. John Deere made a statement in 1856 that I try to live by. And he said, "I will never put my name on something that's not as good as the best in me." So always be critical of what you do. Try to do the best you can. And if you know that you've done the best you can with that situation and it doesn't work out, don't call it a failure.
Right.
Find out why it didn't work.
Right.
And correct that. Don't drop your head down in your boot tops and say, "I'm a failure."
Yeah.
because there's no such thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's about the end of my sermon, but
No, I love it, man. That's great. And I think you're right. Like we all view our reality, each individual's reality is different based off of the lens of perception in which we view it, you know? And Viktor Frankl's a guy who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he's got a quote in there that says, in any given situation, we have the ability to choose our own attitude. And so, or I'm sure I butchered that quote, but you get the point. It's like in any situation, it doesn't matter how good or bad it is, we can choose to look at it, like you said, from a growth mindset standpoint and build on that and either don't make that mistake again or learn from it and adjust, you know, and just see it as an opportunity and not as a failure.
Yes. And the other thing, too, to remember is never be afraid to let go of the stone. If you're being pulled down into the water and, with a stone on a rope, don't be afraid to turn loose of the rope and come back up and get you a fresh breath of air and start all over again.
Yeah.
You know, be proud of yourself and know that you have talents that you can develop. And it doesn't make any difference what they are. You might want to be in the advertising business or sales. You don't have to be a singer or a songwriter or a television artist to be successful if you have talent. Everybody has talents. So it just so happens that I can't drive a truck. You know, it's but I feel like I'm a truck driver, but I just sing about it.
I got you.
So don't be afraid to let go of the stone.
You know, along those same lines, like something I struggle with, and I think a lot of people do, it's like, how do you know when to listen to that voice of intuition that's trying to guide you to live as your highest self, and then also that negative chatter that we all have as human beings for whatever reason, like it's negative by default, I think. How do you navigate that?
You do that with faith. You need to know that who your maker is, and you need to understand that he has a direction for you. He needs for you to take hold of the wheel and drive the car, but he's in charge of the car. You know, and you have to have that faith in yourself and in your Lord and in the world around you. You need to associate yourself with people who can help you, not drag you down. And a person who isn't proud of themselves will try to drag everybody around them down to their level. You never raise that person up to your level. They drag you down to theirs.
Yeah.
And so if you're a solid person and you're proud of who you are and you have a good solid footing and your parents taught you well and you learned a lot in Sunday school about getting along with other people, we're herd animals, and our basic instincts are to get along, because from time immemorial we have depended on each other for survival, and we still do. It's just that we don't do it way out in the country where we have to have each other to get through the bad times. But you take adversity and you don't let it get you down, and you take the good part, as I've said before, take the good parts out of it.
Right.
And go forward.
Yes, sir.
And if something really isn't working, walk away from it. Don't be afraid to let go of the stone.
Yeah.
Because if it's not working, it's dragging you down. So you take the good things from it. I mean, that's just it's not complicated, but maybe it sounds like it's complicated.
I think we make it complicated, you know, like when you think about it, you really sit and think about it, it is simple. It can be very simple, but I think like what we're talking about is just, and I have to do it for myself, like constantly remind myself of those things, you know. One thing that comes up, like I'd like to know how you handled this early on and then still today as you go perform, but you know, playing the comparison game, we look at others and we say, God, look at so-and-so, they're doing this, or we start, you know, making up these stories in our own head about how great somebody else's life may be, and we, or at least, again, I'll only speak for myself, and then kind of take for granted what I have in my own life. So my question to you is, early in your career, how did you avoid playing that comparison game with others?
This is going to sound strange to you, but I was very fortunate that I had polio, and I lost the use of my left arm. And I used the guitar and the mandolin to strengthen my fingers so I could play. And even today, I can't make bar chords. I just hang my thumb on the top of the neck and I play open chords. And it's made me a living for 50 years. But from that point forward, I realized that I wasn't like everybody else. I couldn't pick up a bale of hay with two arms and throw it on the top of a stack. I had to do something different. I had to find a way around that. And by doing that, I think I became a stronger person and knew more about myself, because even today, it's like I was trying to lift something out of the top of a closet yesterday. Had some fiddles I wanted to show one of my fiddle players, and I couldn't get it down. And for just an instant, I was frustrated. And then I realized, somebody else can do that with two arms. You can't do it. Somebody come in here and help me.
Yeah.
So you realize who you are. You realize your strengths and your weaknesses. I like to think you ignore your weaknesses and make positives out of them, and understand your strengths and make them work.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all these things that I'm saying to you, Mike. It sound like I have all the answers, and I don't. I just know what works for me.
And I'm not taking it that way at all, and I don't think anybody else listening does. But you have been through, a career over 50 years. I read a quote by Neil Strauss the other day. It says, "I've never met a strong person with an easy past." You're just telling me your story, and what you've been through and the way you see it. And so I don't take it that way at all, But I do the same thing. Like when I get on this camera and I speak what I'm going through and my experiences, I'm very cautious about that. I'm like, look, I'm no guru. Like, I do not have this life figured out. And that's the thing I figured out is, like, there's no destination. Nobody ever, I don't care who you are or what you have accomplished, has reached that destination where they have it figured out. The journey is the destination. And I say that time and time again.
Yeah. Yep. Life is a great journey.
Yeah.
And you make of it what you want it to be. And it doesn't always turn out exactly like you want it to, but it's the only life we got.
That's it.
So let's be positive about it rather than negative.
Yeah. So you mentioned, your circle and having the right people around you, and I think that's so important. We are the sum of the people that we surround ourselves with. So what I'm curious to know is, I'm going to go back earlier in your career, who were those people that influenced you the most, and what was some of the best advice that you got from those guys?
The one person that influenced me the most was Jim Reeves. And I had a little three-piece band in college, and we were horrible, but...
Now, what makes you say you were horrible?
Oh, we were horrible. We weren't good musicians. We didn't know what we were doing. We were trying real hard.
Yeah.
But the guy who owned KZEP Radio was put on shows in the Civic Auditorium downtown Amarillo, and he always had some local acts to open those shows, and he used me quite a bit. And I became acquainted with Jim Reeves and the guys in his band, and they just kind of took me under their wing. And Jim would say, if you're writing songs, send them to me. Let's take a look at them. So I had a little old bitty Wallensack recorder. I think that's how you say it. And so I'd record it on a tape, and then I'd make another tape, and I'd send it to Jim Reeves. And it wouldn't be but a few days I'd get a letter back, and it said, "Red, you're doing good, but it's not quite right. Keep working at it." And that in itself was the thing that motivated me and made me learn that don't send it to him unless it's the best you can do. And he never did cut one of my songs, but I think he would have in time as I became a professional writer.
Right.
And then Tex Ritter was very important to me. He was a dear friend, and Tex was always giving me encouragement and telling me what to do and what not to do, who to watch out for.
Yeah.
And I learned an awful lot from those two guys.
Yeah.
And then when I got to Hollywood, it was a completely different world. You could be as good as you wanted to be or as bad as you wanted to be, and nobody but you cared. And so you learned to surround yourself with the people who had the same interests that you did and the same set of values.
Was that hard to find out there?
No. There were a lot of Texans out there.
Okay.
And we all kind of gravitated to each other. I remember my first job in the music business was with United Artists Music. And my office was in a little bungalow at the Sam Goldwyn movie lot. There were two bungalows, and then across the street was the commissary, and next to me was a major superstar, Burt Lancaster.
Okay.
And I'd go over there and visit with him. He had a porch on his bungalow, and I just had a step. But he had rocking chairs out there, and he saw me one day, and he said, "Hey, come over and visit, neighbor." So we got to be good friends, and we'd go over to the commissary at 3 o'clock every afternoon and have vanilla ice cream and maraschino cherries. And Burt would take me through those sound stages where they were doing television shows. And I'd ask him questions, and he'd say, "Well, you have to do this first in order to get to this point." And I learned an awful lot about movie making, never dreaming that I would one day have to put it to test.
That's interesting.
But that was a very important part of my education out there, and I wouldn't take anything in the world for it.
Yeah.
And then I was involved in a lot of sessions with Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and Kenny Rogers and Glenn Campbell. They were all, Glenn and Kenny and Mac Davis were my running buddies. So we all learned a lot from each other.
Yeah.
And wrote songs together and rode horses together and played golf. It was a great community. And I just let all the craziness stand on its own 2 feet in that swamp. So I was lucky because I had some really important people in my life who were very successful and very talented and seasoned. So they knew where the pitfalls were.
Talk about some of the things that may come up that may be out of our control. I was listening to an interview you did where you discussed when you felt the industry changed. I believe it was in the 80s sometime when you said TV changed the music industry. I'm just curious, how do you handle that type stuff? Like, how did you find the way to keep doing what you're doing, amidst an industry change? And I'd like to tie that into COVID. It's, like a COVID related question and see what your thoughts are and if that is going to change the music industry.
Well, that goes back to what we were talking about before. You have to know who you are. Mm-hmm. And I was never a superstar. I had a good audience. I mean, really a good audience. They were loyal, and they loved to dance, and I played dance music. And then in '85, the world had started to change. The world of music started to change. Mm-hmm. And we had groups, and it was more of a pop attitude. And there was a time when we'd go out on the road and we'd sell maybe as many as 300 pictures a night. Because that's the only way that audience knew what we looked like was when they came to see us on stage, because we didn't have television. And television changed all of that, and it created a younger audience. The younger audience wanted something different than what Big Brother and Big Sister were listening to. So country music gave them that option. And that was one revolution that I couldn't keep up with, because I like to say that '85 was the year that sad songs and waltzes quit selling. And the kind of music that I was doing, Western swing and honky-tonk, the market was diminished dramatically. And I wasn't getting the television exposure a lot of the acts in Nashville were, because they were starting to be pop-oriented. Kenny Rogers and Dottie West and Kenny and Dolly and and Alabama. Mm-hmm. And those kind of acts were taking over the airwaves. And then there were exceptions to that. Reba and George Strait were exceptions to that, but the most of them were pop-oriented acts. So there wasn't any place for me to go. I could go out on the road and starve to death unless I wanted to play the Holiday Inns for $500 a night. And I'd worked too hard for too many years to go back to that point in a career. So it just so happened that my little brother and I went out to Elko to the first National Cowboy Poetry Gathering, Elko, Nevada. And I saw where my heart really was, because I love the cowboy and the cowboy way of life, with the person who respects tradition and heritage and has a set of values that makes us a harmonious society. So I started writing poetry. And for 5 years, I didn't write a song. I had never allowed myself that luxury before, because I had to write songs for me to record and to get recorded by other people, because that's how I made a living. So when I discovered the poetry and the cowboy music that I dearly love, then I took a different direction. And I started my radio show. In January, we'll start our 28th year. Never dreamed we could keep it on the air that long. But we're still To this day, we're still in 150 markets in 34 states.
Yeah.
And then 13 years ago, I started the television show, simply to provide a platform for me, because we weren't getting that exposure anywhere else except on my radio show and on the kind of television shows I was producing.
Right.
And I keep thinking that somebody else is going to jump in there and do a radio show that, maybe I have the only edge of that market. I don't know. Because there's not a lot of room for a whole bunch of cowboy shows. There's not a lot of room on television for a whole bunch of cowboy shows.
Well, you see what happened is you set the bar too damn high. Nobody's going to come in and fill Red Steagal's boots,
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but I don't look at it that way. It's just that audience is fairly limited compared to 360 million people in the United States. And you say half of those people like rock and roll. And then a certain percentage like jazz, and a certain percentage like blues, and a certain percentage like bluegrass.
Yeah.
Doesn't leave a lot of room for us down here on the bottom end of that, but it's a very loyal audience. They buy what we do. They come to concerts. They still come to dances. I love to play dances, and so that audience is very, very loyal, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah. I think it's important to go back though. Like, there's no way you do any of that without a growth mindset. Without how do I find a way to make this happen and continue to search? I just think that's really, really cool, and I'd like to know. It's a good segue into the Cowboy Gathering that you do right here in Fort Worth. I'm curious to know, what made you start doing that back in, was it 91?
No, this would have been our 30th year.
I'm from Louisiana. I'm not good at math, so whenever that was.
I think it was 91.
Okay. What was it that said, man, this is what I want to do, and this is how I want to do it, where you cross the wagons across the river and really go back to the old days,
First of all, that group of folklorists that put together the Cowboy Portrait Gathering was unbelievable for all the rest of us, whether we are a poet or a singer or just a listener. It brought back into the American consciousness an art form that's been very important to our entire community. And it's the stories and songs of the people in an agrarian society. Not just cowboys, but people who live with the land and belong to the land. Use their minds and their hearts and their hands to grow food for everybody else, and themselves included. Mm-hmm. But till about 1935, there were a large number of people who were writing poems about cowboys and about the cowboy way of life, because it was extremely romantic to people in the East. Here's these wide open spaces, and you can ride off into the sunset on a horse. And here we are walking down the street, Wall Street in New York City, and nothing but buildings and concrete and steel and asphalt. And so the West had a tremendous romantic appeal to people in the big cities. So they started writing. They'd come out, like Henry Herbert Nibbs is one of my favorite poets, and he wrote the most of his poems in 1925 with a visit to the West, and then he went back to New York and became a tremendous novelist. But he used stories that he had seen in the West. Mm. Well, there were a lot of people like him. That the people in Curly Fletcher lived in Las Vegas. He wrote Strawberry Roan, just in the Bad Rama Bull, those kind of things. And then there was S. Omar Barker, who lived in New Mexico, one of the great poets of all time. Mm. But they published a lot of books till about 1935. And then the only ones from 35 till about 85 were people like S. Omar Barker. When the first guy got on stage that I saw at Elko, he said, I thought I was the only one in the world writing this kind of stuff. And he was crying. Mm. And I thought, that means it was forgotten. And another person said, the only way I knew that my granddaddy wrote poems was because his kids put them in a shoebox and put them on the top shelf of the closet. I found them. I didn't know he wrote poetry. So here was this hidden art form that's so important to the development of a Western lifestyle, and all of a sudden it's discovered. Well, then they put one together in Alpine, Texas, which still is going. And so I got the group together over here at the Coliseum one day. We decided that we needed a Cowboy Portrait Gathering in Fort Worth. It was a perfect place for it. And it was really the idea of John South and Jalen Burkett, who were with the Ag Extension Service, A&M Ag Extension. So we got our heads together and we started that gathering. About 3 years later, they both retired and moved out of the country, and I took over. So I had some partners in it, and we've never looked back. The first year, we had 11 inches of rain on Saturday. It was a deluge all day long. But we had enough sponsor dollars to break even, and we've never lost a dime since.
How many people showed up to that first one?
Oh, it's hard to say. We probably didn't sell more than 2,000, 2,500 tickets over the whole weekend.
Yeah. And what did it, I know it got canceled this year because of COVID, but what about last year? How many people turned out for it?
We had about 35,000 people on the streets. Yeah. They don't all buy tickets.
I see.
And it doesn't make any difference to me. What we're doing is trying to educate the general public about a Western lifestyle that we love. Mm-hmm. And it's still alive in Fort Worth, Texas.
I haven't been to one yet. What's the plan for next year? Is it too far out? Because I know you guys do it, the third weekend and fourth weekend in October.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah.
We're getting all of our sponsors lined up.
Gotcha.
Got all the contract signs for the buildings. Yeah. We've got some new landowners, people that we're dealing with, but they're on our side.
I'm curious to know. I know you're a reader. What books do you find yourself rereading most?
I don't read novels. Every once in a while, somebody that I know writes a novel, and I'll read it just to see how they looked at things. But I read nonfiction, and I read about the cowboys and the ranchers and the Indians. I love to read stories about the Native Americans. Mm. And when I was in that bus, for the 17 years I looked out the windshield of that bus from the jump seat, every time we'd pass a historical marker, I'd make him stop. Every time we'd go past an old fort or something up in Montana or South Dakota, North Dakota, I went to all those places. And I read about the people who lived there from the very beginning. Mm. And so when I read the historical accounts, I kind of had an understanding of the Cheyenne and the Sioux and the Arapaho and the Assiniboine and the Mandans. And then in West Texas, the Comanche and the Apache and the Kiowa, the Cherokee and the Pawnee and Choctaw, and all the tribes in Oklahoma. I've read everything I can get my hands on about those people, because I think it's very, very interesting. I also like to read books about the people south of the border who made an impression on what we do. The folks from the Latino community, the vaqueros.
Big influence, yeah.
Tremendous influence. The clothes we wear, the way we handle horses and cattle, the language we speak, the food we eat. They still influence, and greatly. Yeah. So those are the kind of things that I like to read about. I will say this, Mike, it's very important to me that if you're going to write songs or poems today, write it authentically. Don't make up stuff like Hollywood did. Hollywood taught us a lot about the cowboy that we didn't know. Mm-hmm. And they did it simply to satisfy an audience who didn't understand the true lifestyle. But if we don't correctly write what we see and how it actually happened, 50 years from now, what we write today may be the only reference those people have to how we lived and how we thought, the things that were important to us. And if we don't write about it correctly, then all this is for naught.
That's sage advice, and I think you're seeing that now. As much as I hate social media, I think it is simultaneously the best thing and worst thing to happen to the human race. But you see those cowboys really getting to document life on the ranch and what their day-to-day really looks like, and not what Hollywood is. And so we're now getting a real look at it, in its most true form. I've got one more question for you, Red, and then I was going to see if I could get you to read a poem to kind of close the show out.
Okay.
So if you could, hypothetically speaking, put something on a billboard, like a message to get out to millions of people, maybe a quote that you have or a quote that you've seen, what would that message say?
Well, it's a tough one. But the most important thing that I think we can do as a community, and we do this every once in a while, is it's more important to feel leather and oak wood than it is plastic and tinsel. And so be real about yourself. Be real about this great country that we live in. Don't try to make something out of it that it's not. Let's be happy that we live in a country where everybody in the world wants to be a part of it. So it must be something good.
Got chills. That's good. Good deal. Would you mind doing a poem? Oh, before I get into that, where can people find you? Like, what is next for Red Steagal? Website, social media?
My website is just redsteagal.com.
Okay.
And we're on Facebook, and I don't know what all that other stuff is.
You're on Instagram.
We're on Instagram, are we?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's just at Red Steagal.
Yeah.
Yeah. But do you have any shows coming up? You going to be doing anything else at the NFR while you're here, or anywhere around?
No, I'm just going to go sit in those seats I paid for.
Okay. And enjoy it, right?
And enjoy the rodeo.
Yeah, heck yeah.
But
I'm curious, how do you remember all your poems?
I don't remember all of them. There are certain ones that I use in the shows that I make sure I remember.
Yeah.
Because I use them as a part of my show,
Yeah.
live show.
I didn't know. I mean, I've of course watched your shows before, but I'm like, damn, Red is polished. Like, are they editing that, or are you just remember? You seem like it's just fluid every single time, though. I mean, I've seen you. I know, like in other interviews, I've seen you just spout them out, never miss a beat. You know, it's impressive. That was a question I wanted to.
The older I get, the tougher it is to do that. It seems like, but like last night, I forgot the first two lines of that fourth verse.
And so what? You just keep playing, and nobody knows the difference.
Making up words.
That's awesome. That's
We
awesome.
got through it. I asked Gail last night if she noticed I missed a line or two, and she said, "Yeah, I noticed it, but nobody else did. You made up words that fit."
Yeah. That's funny. Well, good deal. Well, I don't have anything else for you, but I would love to hear a poem.
How much time do we have?
As much as you want. Much as you want.
Well, there are several poems that I'm actually more proud of than others. One is, I'll tell you the story about it. We've been to a roping down in Houston, celebrity roping, and Ben Johnson was our patriarch and my very special friend. I unsaddled my horse and I got in a little late, and we were at the Omni Hotel in Houston. And he's sitting over on a couch with a little Indian cowboy that we both knew, Joe Crow. And Joe was getting up in years. He'd been here for a while. But he and Ben were sitting over swapping stories, and Ben said, "Hey, Red, come over and get Joe to tell you a story." And he said, "Joe, tell Red about that time Will Rogers rode your bicycle." And Joe said, "Well, I was with Herb McSpadden, who was Will Rogers' brother-in-law, but also Clem McSpadden's father. And Clem ran the ranches, the Rogers ranches. And he said, I had my bicycle in the back of Herb's pickup, and we drove out to landing strip. There was a plane sitting out there, and Will and this feller that was with him that had a patch on his eye, and I didn't know who he was. And he said, Will said, "Joe, let me ride your bicycle." Said, "I need to get the kinks out of my legs before we take off from here." So he said, Will got on my bicycle and rode it around the tarmac there and put it back in the pickup and started up the gangplank. And Herb said, "Will, where you boys going?" Herb said, "Me and Wiley are going to Alaska." And Herb said, "You be careful. There's a lot of deep rivers between here and there." And he said, "I'll make you a deal, Herb. Before we cross every one of them deep rivers, I'll leave a good horse on this side." That's all I heard. I couldn't get away from him. I stood by the fountain as they brought him out a lost, lonely look on his face. I ain't never seen him in nothing but boots, and the wheelchair sure seemed out of place. It took him a while to recall who I am. Then confusion broke into a grin. It was though we were saddled up, ready to ride the hackberry pasture again. He laughed as he said, I remember the time that yeller bronc swallowed his head and pitched you so high that you turned over twice. Me and Benny Bob swore you was dead. He looked up at me and said, how is old Ben? I lied and said he's doing fine. No need to remind him his brother was gone. Ben died back in '79. For most of an hour we rode at a trot, branded and shaped up the steers, drank gallons of coffee, ate sourdough bread, and cowboyed for 51 years. I thought he was an old man when I was a kid. At a time when I needed a friend, he took me to raise, taught me all that I know about horses and cattle and men. See, my daddy had died, and I needed a job, and I was big for a kid of 15. So they put me to work on the 4-6's ranch. I was dumb as a gourd and as green. We was looking for strays in the Wichita breaks. There was me and John Gaither and him, and I'd lost sight of John. I was looking around, kind of daydreaming there on the rim, and rode up on some cattle hid out in the brush. A 2-year-old steer come by me, throwed a 9 in his tail, and cut a new trail right out through them salt cedar trees. I lit out behind him and giving her hell. The colt I was riding was green, but I thought to myself, he ain't getting away. This roan is a running machine. We was going full bore when we got to the bank. Stream wasn't wide as my hat. I almost pulled up, and I thought, what the hell, I'll jump rivers wider than that. Well, I bogged that old pony plumb up to his gut. He's wallering and thrashing around and going down deeper with each desperate lunge, and me praying he'd find solid ground. Then just at the moment that I heard his voice, a rope appeared right by the roan. Get out of that cack and hang on to my line. The colt will get out on his own. Crossed that old river many a time and found me a bog once or twice. But I still remember a 30-foot rope and a good cowboy piece of advice. When you ride that river, son, make sure your horse is gentle and seasoned as well, 'cause only the good ones will get you across. That quicksand goes clean down to hell. I got up to leave, and he reached for my hand. He said, son, I'm sure glad you dropped by. If you see old Ben, have him saddle my horse. I hate sitting waiting to die. His voice started cracking. He swallowed and said, I'm nearing the end of my ride, but if I cross the river before you get there, I'll leave a good horse on this side.
I love it, man. I love it.
Thank you.
That's all I have for you, Red. I am so grateful for your time, my friend. Grateful for Schaefer Outfitter for letting us, host these interviews here at their store down in the Stockyards in Fort Worth. And looking forward to the rest of the week.
Me too.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me.
Yes, sir.